multitasking. It's something that we do in order to save time by focusing on lots of things at once. But think about this. Imagine that it costs 5 cents every time you switch from focusing on a lecture and texting a friend. Doing this once or twice is no problem at all, but this adds up over time into being a major problem. Think about if you did this all day. If you were switching from your lecture to texting a friend, through going through social media, checking your messages, checking the events that are coming up, speaking of all of your friends while doing work at the same time, well, then that would be a lot of sense. So how much time are you actually wasting in doing all of this sort of stuff? So I'm actually guilty of this sometimes myself as well. So we're going to take a look at why multitasking is so bad and what can we do about it to prevent it in the future. Hey guys, Archie here, a second year medical student, and on this channel, we learn how to learn more effectively so that we don't have to rely on multitasking, so that we have more time for the things and the people who matter to us. So what you actually have as your idea of multitasking is quote unquote rapid task switching, going from one task to another quite quickly. And our brains can do this quite autonomously, and it might seem quite seamless, like you're doing it at the same time, but really at the end of the day, you're just focusing on one thing quickly before switching to another. But the issue comes in the fact that you are having to recalibrate your focus every time you switch from one task to another. You don't even realize it actually happens subconsciously. And you have to work out where you're really up to with each task as you're doing them simultaneously. And one of the things that we notice is that multitasking is about dividing your time into focusing on these particular tasks at the same time. And what really happens is that you spend a longer amount of time focusing on these things together as opposed to just doing them individually. So let's go through how this doesn't work and how we can design our environment to make multitasking less of a problem. Then we'll go into some study techniques that can help us out specifically here. To put it simply, more tasks means more mistakes. In a study, there were two groups. There was one group that just did one task alone and another group that did two tasks at the same time. Almost always in this study, those who did the two tasks performed worse than those who just did the single task. Another study mentioned the retention of those who were texting friends while they were going about their study, or through Discord or messages or anything like that. What do you sort of expect? Their retention was lower, and quite significantly as well. So what does this actually mean? You have to spend more time relearning and revising the content, specifically because you didn't put your phone away in the first place. In fact, you're actually pushing away the goal of having to study less. So there are several things that have to happen when you switch between certain tasks. We have to disengage with the first task, then figure out what the task is, and then adjust our sort of parameters and mindset to be ready to begin that next task. So there's actually physically this delay between trying to think about the next thing that you're going to do and then getting actually started with that thing. And like I mentioned, if you're doing this switch every few minutes, but really it happens every few seconds when you are trying to multitask, this adds up to a lot of time. All of that time that you've been recalibrating is actually being wasted because that could have just been put to the single task on its own. This actually makes sense because our brains on an evolutionary basis are made to pay attention to all the different stimuli that come up to us. Now, mostly in the modern age, this is through the form of distractions. And I'm sure everyone has heard about how the social media giants have put a lot of research into making the notifications really, really enticing to click on and as a very good distraction to capture our attention. Multitasking isn't also just a time waster. It is actually something that increases your stress levels and your emotional unrest and all that sort of stuff as well. You're actually putting your brain under more pressure and more cognitive load to deal with a lot of things at once. And you're trying to get all of them done, and you can get confused quite easily with all the things that you're doing, that it just becomes a negative process. Not only this, multitasking does reduce your retention. And if you think about it, this does make sense because if you're focusing on two things at once, you're not really giving the proper amount of attention to each particular thing. So when you come back to this later and do some active recall or something like that, it's actually going to be harder to remember each of those things individually. And I'm sure you've had some level of experience with this before, which is why it's so important to go beyond understanding and learning things to a superficial level. And it's much harder actually to get past this sort of level if you are multitasking to learn particular things at the same time. And that's just an example of trying to multitask efficiently, which doesn't really work. But imagine if you're multitasking while going on your phone, it's going to be even worse. Now, multitasking is also bad for creativity and problem solving as well. This is actually because you're not even giving yourself enough time to go in depth with a particular thing to come up with some sort of creative spark or trying to solve some harder problem, like in an assignment. Often the greatest moments of creativity and problem solving actually happen within the flow state But the thing is that multitasking is actually an enemy of the flow state itself. And on a quick note, multitasking isn't always bad. So if you think about someone who's flying a plane, obviously they need to be multitasking, look at many different things at the same time, looking at the instruments and all that sort of stuff. And you can also be listening to music while you are running or something like that. But the biggest difference here is that we're thinking about productivity in actually doing a particular thing and getting something done. The airplane pilot is not gonna fly the plane any quicker by focusing on one particular thing. And it really just depends on what your sort of goal is, right? Are you trying to enjoy running, for example, by listening to music at the same time, or are you trying to focus more on your actual running technique? So when we're talking about multitasking here, we're really focusing on productivity of just getting a particular thing done in the shortest amount of time as possible while having the most quality that we can. So what is your main distraction? Is it social media? Is it your phone? Is it websites like Reddit? Is it your family, your pets, or is it actually your mind itself? The reward-seeking areas of our brain are actually activated when it comes to getting distracted and when we fall into the trap of multitasking particular things. Whenever we're looking at that new shiny email or message, we are getting that dopamine hit. We are always going to have distractions. It doesn't actually matter if you throw away your phone, lock out all of these websites. You know, at the end of the day, your mind is going to play some tricks on yourself as well. And I mean, I've had certain cases for myself and some of my students who, you know, they get rid of all of the distractions and they still just find that they're playing with their thumbs or their pen or something like that. So we really need to get good with acknowledging distractions, but also letting them pass and ignoring them and ignoring that temptation that comes with them. Now, this is really hard. This is something that requires a lot of skill and a lot of practice. So what you should use environment design, like I've mentioned in other videos, where you can to reduce the amount of times that you actually need to do this. So you should build this like a muscle. When you see a distraction come up, realize that it is a distraction and make sure that you focus on the task that's on hand. Doing this enough time builds up that skill of being able to avoid these temptations. Let's talk a little bit about environment design. For me personally, a lot of times I have messages coming up at the same time when I'm trying to get work done. So when I actually want to get some deep and meaningful work done that I know is important and also urgent, I'll make sure to get rid of these distractions as much as I can. This prevents me from multitasking because I know I've set a clear goal to just do this one particular thing. So this is the whole idea of building habits so we can go on autopilot, which I've mentioned in another video, and we can lower the friction in trying to get started with a particular thing. We just want to make it really easy to just sit down and get started. In short, taking out the discipline, determination, and willpower to actually stay focused and concentrate on a particular thing is something that we should really prioritize to replace this instead with habits. So let's talk a little bit about study techniques that we can use to actually combat this beyond the other things that I've mentioned in a previous video. This is beyond everything like effective scheduling, effective time management, Pomodoro, breaks, and all that sort of stuff. So the one thing that we want to really think about is if there's a particular task that we really need to get done and requires us to be concentrated, we need to set aside the time to do this. And this is what I mean when I said deep and meaningful work. If you have an assignment, usually this fits that sort of criteria. And so you want to block out and set up everything for this certain time to get started on that particular thing. So instead of multitasking, we are now thinking about monotasking. And this means you'll be able to produce much higher quality work as well when you go ahead and do it. Now, one of the most important things that I want to talk about in this video is about flow states. If you don't yet know what a flow state is, it is that period when you get so engrossed with the work that you forget about time and how quickly it passes. This is usually how I feel when I'm recording these videos because it's actually quite late right now, but I've had quite a bit of fun in making these videos. So wherever we can, we want to be prioritizing these flow states. The funny thing is as well is that while this actually helps you a lot with getting quality work done, it actually helps us feel better within our day. And flow states don't have to be hugely long, like 2 hours or 1 hour. They can come in small bursts as well. But if we can prioritize this by reducing our distractions and environment design, and all of these study techniques actually come together, well, then we're in a good place. And to enter the flow state, it's actually just as simple as keeping focus. That's all that we're worried about. And this is actually quite difficult in itself, which is why I want to talk a little bit about mindfulness meditation. So I don't even need to really sell mindfulness meditation. Everyone sort of knows that meditation is good for them, but specifically mindfulness meditation is a form that's really useful when it comes to getting lots of work done or study. And in fact, I have found this to be the single-handedly biggest thing in improving my focus and concentration when it actually comes to sit down to do deep and meaningful work. I have to admit, I get distracted a lot, but the whole idea of mindfulness meditation is that you acknowledge those distractions, but you acknowledge them and you say bye-bye to them. And this happens a lot of time within my work as well. I always have some other thought that comes up into my mind while I'm working on some other particular assignment or something like that. And I know that other thing has to be done, but I just need to write it down and get back to the work at hand. So how can you sort of do this? Well, I'm not an expert in mindfulness meditation. There's a lot of videos out there, but when it comes to study, you particularly just want to be thinking about focusing on one particular thing as you do this meditation. And I usually do this in quite short bursts, maybe 5 minutes is usually what I do. And usually I'll just be focusing on one particular thing. Most of the time for me, it's just focusing on my Apple Pencil and just this. Now, in the first minute and two, it's actually really hard not to think about other things that are going on, because mindfulness meditation is pretty much about switching off your brain as much as you can and focusing on one particular thing. But there are always going to be those other racing thoughts that come through. So as I focus on this gives me a lot of time to practice, like I was mentioning, building this muscle of being able to focus on a particular task at a certain time. So how can you try this out? When you're having a break between a study session or something like that, set aside 5 minutes to just focus on one particular thing. It doesn't actually matter what it is. Maybe it's a wallet or something like that. Feeling the texture, looking at it, observing everything about it so that your focus is only just on the one particular object. I know it sounds weird to be doing meditation when it comes to study, but I cannot exaggerate this enough. This has been the biggest thing for me in actually improving my focus, because I get distracted by social media quite a lot, which is usually why I'm spending a lot of time on TikTok recently. But when I'm coming to my work now, I find that I'm actually able to feel a lot more focused, and that's quite a unique feeling in itself. Reducing multitasking is about improving our focus on one particular task at a certain time. And hopefully you'll find that each task takes you less time to complete because you're not wasting your time on recalibrating. All right, so hopefully you found this video useful, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye-bye.